Walking the serpentine path, following the footsteps of the ancestors. Walking the serpentine path, making our way back home. Hey ya, hey, hey ya ho, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya ho. Hey ya, hey, hey ya ho. Following the serpentine path. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Serpentine Path podcast. My name is Claire Waudia Seed, and I'm a plant walker, song keeper, word weaver, artesana, visual and performance artist, womb wisdom keeper, and your guide on this serpentine path of life. Together, we'll dive deep into all things related to plant medicine, ancestral reconnection, intergenerational healing, womb sovereignty and bodily autonomy, rites of passage and initiation, time travel, shape-shifting, dimension hopping, the reclamation of our collective earth-based practices, and the ongoing, never-ending cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Welcome to the serpentine path where the ancestors have called us back to. Let's start at the end and find our way back home together. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Serpentine Path podcast. It has been a while, actually, since I have recorded any episodes at all, solo episodes or, episodes with guests that I've brought on to interview, which has been really nice to just give myself the spaciousness during the intensity of the holidays and the end of the year and a lot of stuff that I was pushing towards. And it was also just nice to take a break and to tap into what this show is continuously birthing itself into and learning how to get out of the way and get out of the way and get out of the way so that it can be birthed. Just like in life, just like in an actual birth, like that's really the work, is just get out of your own way so that the messages can be channeled and can be brought forth through you. And what's been really interesting with this show, I would say probably over like the past 6 months, is that whenever I look at some of like the analytics for the keyword searches around this show, like SEO searches, continuously what comes up is that this show is one of the top hits for the term, specifically adult female initiation, or like adult woman initiation. It kind of goes back and forth between those two. And it is like in the top 10. It's like number 7 or something, this show, which is always really funny to me because this is not like a super widely known show. I don't have like hundreds of thousands of listeners. And so every time I see that, I'm like, how is it possible that, this like one woman show essentially that I run here is like the number 7 podcast for adult female initiations? That was like the first question that always comes up, is like, how interesting. The second part of it was that when I saw that at first, I was like, wait, is that what this show is about? Is this show about adult female initiations? And I was like, initially, I was like, no, this show is about my life. Like, this show is just about my crazy freaking life. and what's been unfolding for me. And then I was like, oh, wait, is my life about adult female initiations? And then I was like, oh, yeah. Yes, that's actually exactly what my life has been thus far. And I would say over the past almost year, as I've been in my Saturn return, I've really, really deepened into this understanding that I've been in this process of very seriously reinitiating myself into womanhood and kind of tapping into everything that has happened to me since I left my parents' home at 18. So essentially a decade of my life, what's been going on, and processing it and composting it and just figuring out like what is there to continue to be investigated, right? And so then I was thinking about the women who I've brought onto this show. I was thinking about all of my friends that I brought on, all of my teachers and my mentors that I've brought on. And what I've been able to tap into is that every single one of those women are women who are either in the process currently of like reinitiating themselves into womanhood. They're mostly women who are like around my age, like in their late 20s, in their early or mid 30s, going through this process of um yeah, picking up the missed pieces of womanhood that they did not receive. Predominantly, I would say kind of starting in their teenage years, starting like after their first menstrual cycle, and then moving into their adult womanhood and what that has looked like for every single one of them. And that work of essentially feminine wisdom keeping reclamation work. And really, the word that just keeps coming up for me is like reinitiation, reinitiation, reinitiation into womanhood. And so then I was looking at the women who I know listen to this podcast, right? The women who have sent me so many wonderful emails, the women who have sent me amazing like DMs and texts, the women that I've spoken to in person who are listeners of this podcast. And I'm like, oh, these are all women who are moving through this same process of reinitiating themselves into womanhood. And I was like, okay, this has been like my personal homework assignment pretty much for the past decade of my life. And this is also the collective homework assignment of so many women in my sphere. And I feel that this is actually just like the work of what it is to be a modern woman right now. And there's so many layers to that, which I'm going to be getting into. It's like such a big conversation, like reinitiating ourselves into womanhood, adult female initiations. Like, what does this even look like? And so today's episode is really going to be focused on like what my path has looked like with that. And then in future episodes and in a lot of other offerings that I have coming up, specifically like a lot of my writing, all of this is going to be focused on this topic of like, what do we do as modern women? What do we do? What are we doing currently? Like, how did we get here? And what do we do moving forward? So I'm gonna really soften into my story in this episode, but I also know that my story is like so not unique to me. I know that I have specific things that are unique to my lived experience, but I know that I'm walking with wounds that are so incredibly common and are so deeply felt in the feminine collective because they're wounds of lineage fracture, specifically wounds of like fractures in our mother lines. And I'm getting emotional just thinking about it because it's so deep. It's so deep. And so while I speak about my story, I know that every woman who's listening to this is going to be able to identify different parts of herself in this story because, as I said, this is like the big collective work of our generation of women. So when I think about my own reinitiation into womanhood, I of course kind of go into my girlhood, what my girlhood looked like. And I've spoken very in depth on the podcast in one specific episode, all about my gender journey. For those who are maybe new listeners, I identified as non-binary, gender fluid, gender non-conforming very strongly for about 7 years of my life. And even before that, pretty much my whole childhood and my all of my teenage years, I struggled with what would be considered gender dysphoria. That's like the only term that I had available to me to understand that experience. I don't see it as gender dysphoria anymore, but that's like what the diagnostic term would technically be. And when I tap into what that stemmed from, it wasn't until pretty much like my late 20s that I recognized that throughout my very young girlhood, up until about age 6, I didn't think that much about being a girl, you know? I just did things that little girls do. And there was an aspect of me that was kind of like little girly. You know, I wanted to play with dolls. I wanted to dress up. I wanted to do the whole thing. I wasn't like hyper feminine, but just interested in the same things that little girls were interested in. And then there was a big shift in my relationship to girlhood when I was 6 years old. And what happened to me when I was 6 years old was that it was the first time that I experienced any kind of sexual abuse. I was molested by my neighbor, who was just a little bit older than me, a boy neighbor. And in that moment, that experience of sexual abuse that went on for about a year, my memory isn't super clear, but for about a year, I went from this process of not even thinking about my girlhood, my femininity, not questioning any of it at all, to slowly but surely shifting into more of like a tomboy expression, much more masculine. And what I know now was that that was my unconscious way of attempting to protect myself because my little 6-year-old brain was essentially thinking, if I make myself more like a boy, I can avoid being sexually abused. This was not conscious. No 6-year-old is thinking this, but that was what my psyche and my spirit were going through in terms of some aspect of protection from this. And so from that point on, I really started to feel more like one of the boys, wanting to be one of the boys, really not wanting to engage with femininity at all. I have two younger sisters who are very feminine. And I always felt totally disconnected from them. And I felt totally disconnected from other girls who were doing the more stereotypically girly things. It just didn't call to me in any way. And I really strongly rejected it, really strongly, because in my psyche, the association with girlhood was rape, right? Like that's like the clearest way that I can put it. Being a girl means that I will be raped, okay? Now, when I moved into my teenage years, when I moved into, yeah, I guess like 14 years old, in high school, and at the point where, girls were getting boyfriends, and I was feeling called to that and excited about that and curious about that, I started to recognize that the girls who got male attention were the ones who were a lot more feminine than I was. And so I was kind of like, okay, well, I want a boyfriend. So I gotta like learn how to be girly. And I just did what I saw, in like 17 magazine and like Cosmo magazine, which I would, buy and hide. Cosmo magazine is horrible. It should be burned. But, I had all of my copies of Cosmo and all my copies of 17. And I was like, all right, I'm gonna learn how to be girly. I'm gonna learn how to be feminine. I'm gonna learn how to be a woman. I'm gonna learn how to get a man, right? And I went through this whole process, and I had quite a few experiences with teenage boys that were different gradients of sexual abuse. I wouldn't name any of them as like outright rape, but a lot of blurry lines with consent is the best way that I can put it, until I did finally end up in a serious relationship, right? I ended up with my first long-term boyfriend who I was with for 5 years from like age 17 to age 22. And there's a lot that I could say about that relationship, a lot that I have already said about that relationship, but a huge part of that relationship was that I was not my authentic self in any capacity because I was trying so hard to be some version of a woman that I knew I wasn't, that I knew wasn't comfortable for me and wasn't true for me. And the other aspect of that is that I was on birth control the entire time that I was in that relationship. Actually, that's a lie. Not the entire time, for the first 3.5 years of that relationship. And then I transitioned off of it. And what's fascinating to learn is that when you are ovulating naturally as a woman, You're seeing the world from the left side of your brain, which is the side of your brain that produces estrogen. This is the side of the brain that sees the world through a feminine perspective because of the hormone estrogen. When you're not ovulating, which happens when you're on hormonal birth control, which happens when you are pregnant, which happens when you are postpartum and not yet menstruating again, and then after you've gone through menopause, you are seeing the world from the right side of your brain because that is the male side of the brain, and that's going to be dominated by testosterone. And so when I look at my relationship with my first serious partner, I was on birth control, and so I was seeing the world from a male perspective. And I was so hyper masculine in this moment in time. This was when I was in college. I was a dance major. I was like obsessed with being absolutely perfect. And I was as close to perfect as I could have possibly gotten, right? Like, I was extremely disciplined. I was focused. I did not party. I didn't even really have close relationship with friends in college. I was just like, go, go, go. I woke up every single morning at 6. I went to yoga. Then I went to dance class from 8 a.m. until 12 p.m. I ran to campus and did my university academics. I ran back to the dance building and did my dance academics. Then I had rehearsals, then I had homework, and then I woke up and I did it all over again. And I was just pushing so hard, and my body was suffering horrendously in so many ways, right? But I was on birth control, and so I was just looking at the world in the way that men look at the world, which is on this 24-hour clock of testosterone. Like that's just what my vibe was. I didn't have any lunar relationship with a monthly cycle because I didn't have a monthly cycle. I wasn't ovulating. And so I was just like boom, 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 go, go, go. I was totally numb, totally shut off, zero intuition, like entirely offline. But I was very successful, right? I was like one of the star dancers in my program. My professors absolutely loved me. Like I was on track to be this very famous, like professional dancer. I was legit. I was really good, you guys. Like I was really good, super talented, and just obsessed, like hyper disciplined, hyper masculine. And what happened to me that shifted things was that when I was in my very last semester of college, when I was 20, I had this really insane out of body experience, which I've talked about on the very first episode of the podcast, where, yeah, I just completely left my body. I time traveled. I was communicating with all these crazy spirits. Like something about me came back online finally for the first time, I feel like in my life. And I was completely sober, by the way, totally sober. Literally in the middle of like a university class, like a 3 hour long lecture class that I was in. And essentially, after that experience, probably within 2 or 3 months, I took myself off of birth control cold turkey, and my whole spirit came back online. And it was really crazy because my creativity was completely different. My artistic voice was drastically transformed. My whole libido came back online. It was as if I was going through this process of um puberty again, essentially. And I was just like a horny little teenager, but at this point I was like 21 years old and I was like, what is going on? I lost all attraction to my ex-partner, like completely not attracted to him anymore because my pheromone receptors were totally different. And more than anything, my voice really came back online. Like the way that I was able to speak and express myself and share, it was so fiery, almost to like an extreme extent because I was moving through essentially like 4.5 or 5 years of vocal suppression that had been occurring because of birth control. And so there was a lot of outpouring of essentially 5 years worth of like unsaid things that had been stuck in my body. And the other part of this was that I started getting horrendously painful periods. Like I remember my first period after being off of birth control was one of the most painful experiences of my life. I literally couldn't get up off the floor for like hours and hours and hours for like the first 2 days of my bleed. And that continued for like many years after because I didn't know anything about hormonal balancing. I didn't know how to feed myself. I didn't know any herbs that could support me. I had no idea that I was like just pushing myself so intensely physically as a dancer that my body was just like, no, like this isn't how the female body is supposed to operate. I was just seriously, seriously, seriously suffering. And so when I look at this phase of my life, what I also am able to tap into is the recognition that when you go on hormonal birth control, right, it essentially halts your sexual development. It stops your ovaries and your uterus, your fallopian tubes, your vagina, your clitoris, your vulva. Like it actually stops it from developing because you don't have the hormones pumping through your body. What it also is halting is going to be your emotional development and your spiritual development. And so when I look at what occurred in those 5 years, it feels like my feminine soul was like body snatched out of my body, right? And it was just kind of in the ethers, like floating around, like, hey, we're still here. Like, whenever you want to get back into your body and get off of these pills, like, we'll do it. And I didn't know that that's what was happening until I did get off the pills and my soul came back into my body. And I was just like, oh, holy shit, wait. I feel like I just blacked out over the past 5 years. And my sexual development started happening again, my hormonal development, right? Like my entire endocrine system, but then also my emotional development and my spiritual development. I feel like all started where I left off. So I was essentially 21 years old in real time, but my body, my spirit, and my emotions were like frozen as my 16-year-old self. And so it was like playing catch up in this way, right? And I felt that occurring throughout the next couple of years. I went through, this very painful experience of a pretty dysfunctional, and at times abusive relationship with my first partner that was 5 years long. And also a relationship that was so important because it forced me to really activate my voice, to really, really speak up. And it first started when I got off of birth control, and for the year and a half after that in our relationship, of me just finding my voice and fighting back finally, like really, really fighting back. And it took a long time. It took a really long time for me to get the courage to finally leave after trying to leave like 7, 8 different times, like really finding the courage to say, I know I deserve better than to be treated like this. And I know that the version of who I'm supposed to be cannot exist in this relationship anymore. And it was a really, really hard initiation to go through. It was a very hard initiation with my whole family system. It was a hard initiation with my entire friend group that had known us for 5 years as a couple. It was just absolutely insane, right? And it was also during this time, kind of towards the tail end of our relationship, that a lot of my things with gender started to get really painful. And I think a lot of this was because, this was about a decade ago at this point, like 8, 9 years ago, where conversations around gender were first really coming into the sphere. Conversations around like, you don't have to be a man or a woman, like there's more options there. Like you can be gender fluid, you can be gender non-conforming, you could be non-binary, you can be trans, like you can be all of these things. And I was living in New York City and I was surrounded by a bunch of artists and I was just like in this world of queer theory. And I was like, oh, that's totally me. Like, I'm definitely not a woman. I've never felt like a woman. I never felt like a girl. Like, that's what makes sense to me, right? And so slowly but surely, I was really getting attached to this identity of I'm non-binary. I think at first I said like I'm gender fluid and I'm gender non-conforming, and then eventually I really claimed like no, I'm non-binary. And I really held on to it for so long. For like 7 years, I held on to this as what I can see now as like a protection mechanism because I was still moving through a lot of ongoing sexual abuse. There was a lot of not great sexual things that happened in my first serious relationship. And then after that, due to just like all of the unresolved trauma from that 5-year relationship, from the sexual abuse that I experienced before getting into that relationship in my teenage years, and then the sexual abuse throughout my childhood, all of that was being compounded at this point in time. And so throughout like my mid 20s at this point, right? I was moving through these ongoing processes of self-re-victimization around my sexuality. And I was also living in New York City. I'm with all of these artists and queer people, and there's this big theme of like sex positivity and like this phrase that I will always have burned into my brain, right? It's like be a slut, do whatever you want. It's empowering, it's feminist, like go fuck a bunch of guys. Like that's how you get your power back. That's how you are liberated as a woman. Like it's this very strange, warped version of I don't know what to call it, like millennial feminism. I don't know. I don't know what that would be called. Like boss girl feminism. I don't know. You guys know exactly what I'm talking about, okay? Anyway, this is what I'm living in. And so this is what I'm doing. However, I'm also moving through this thing of I'm not a woman. And what I know now is that what I was saying, I'm not a woman, I'm not a woman, it was this protective measure of if I distance myself from womanhood, if I say that I'm not a woman, then hopefully I won't get raped, which is the exact same theme of when I was 6 years old and started turning into a tomboy because I was experiencing sexual abuse. I was being molested, I was being raped as a kid. And so then the exact same thing, almost 20 years later, 2 decades later, it's the exact same pattern of me saying, if I divorce myself from womanhood, this will keep me safe from sexual violence. That was what I was thinking. However, that's just not the reality. The reality is I am in a female body. No matter what I say, no matter what I do, I will never not be in a female body. And this was something that took me a really long time to come to terms with and to grapple with and to sit with the reality of and to make peace with as well, which I'll talk about. But at the time, I was like in so much pain. I was in so much goddamn pain from the high degree of sexual abuse that I had gone through and that I was continuing to experience. I was also really struggling with a lot of substance abuse, a lot of alcohol, a lot of illicit drugs. I didn't have good female friendships at this point in my life. All my female friendships were like super toxic and very codependent and disrespectful, both in terms of the women that I was friends with and in terms of the kind of friend that I was. I was a shit friend at this point in my life. I was not a good female friend, and of course, those were the women that I had around me. A lot of whom were also saying, like, I'm not a woman, I'm not a woman. We're all in this like whole thing of like, we're not women, even though we are playing out like the deepest, most timeless, most well known wounds of womanhood, which is like deep sister wounds that we're just enacting upon one another over and over and over again, right? Even though we're saying not women, we're not women, we're still doing the exact same toxic feminine bullshit that women have been doing since the beginning of time. And so all of that is to say that when I finally did make some shifts in my life, I was in a deep phase of profound self-hatred and lack of support, lack of resourcing. I didn't really have any women in my life who I could look to as like true examples of the kind of womanhood that I wanted to embody. I had like a few directors and mentors and teachers in the dance world who I was dancing for. But for the most part, like it really wasn't available to me. I couldn't locate a version of womanhood that felt accessible for who I wanted to be. And so in that I just renounced womanhood altogether, entirely, completely. I didn't want anything to do with it, right? And the other part of this that I will say is that while I was in this whole I'm not a woman thing, I'm non-binary, I'm gender fluid, I'm gender non-conforming, I also really, really, really looked down on women. I really looked at women and was like, you are not as good as me because you're a woman. And I'm something more than that. I'm special. I'm different. I'm expansive. I'm more spiritual. I'm more evolved. I'm more developed. I see beyond the trappings of the female body. I'm better than you. Was really, really how I felt and how I walked in the world. I'm better than you because I'm not a woman. And I would also say something that was really interesting was that when I started identifying very loudly as non-binary and using they, she, and he pronouns, I was a they, she, he. When I did this, I got a lot more attention. I got a lot more respect. I felt that people really valued my opinion more and listened to me more. And I felt that I had, yeah, more access to power when I divorced myself from womanhood. Like the more violently I divorced myself from womanhood, the more respect I felt that I got, which was really interesting. And the less I respected women, the perspective of women. And I really tried to like erase women and diminish women and say that experiences that are explicit to the female bodied experience, like we're not important and we're not valuable. This was like a big, big distortion that I was living in for many years. Like I think like a whole 7 years of my life. I was really deep in this. And what started shifting things for me was that I went to the jungle for the first time. I ended up in the Colombian jungle and I sat in plant medicine ceremonies for the first time. I sat with the medicine of Diaje, which is the Colombian brew of ayahuasca, and I was 4 hours deep in the jungle. And as I started drinking medicine, I started just hearing the word woman, 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 woman. Also the word in Spanish, mujer, right? Like mujer, mujer, woman. And just hearing this word made me want to puke, like fully want to vomit. Just the word woman made me feel sick. And it was something that came up ceremony after ceremony after ceremony for like many months of, I would say for like the first year or two of my experience of going deep with plant medicines. Um, yeah, the first 2 years, every time I drank and I would tap into womanhood, it made me feel sick. And I would often like puke in ceremony just from hearing the word woman in my mind's eye or hearing woman, the word mujer being sung in songs, right? It was really, really painful. And um, there's no way that I can like conceptualize it other than like it was just this monster of internalized misogyny that was ruling my life, that was making me hate being a woman. And the root of that was the sexual abuse that I had been through and the feeling of not being safe in my body. And it was a protective measure of like, being a woman is dangerous. Being a woman is not safe. Being a woman exposes me to profound degrees of violence. And so if I were to accept that I'm a woman, I would have to accept that all those things happen to me because I'm a woman. And I just could not do that. I couldn't do it for like 2 years. I couldn't face it. It was so painful, so unbelievably painful, right? And during this time, still, I'm dealing with horrendous pain with my reproductive health, really painful periods, chronic vaginal infections, right? Yeast infections, urinary tract infections. I got to a point where I had like a full on pelvic infection, pelvic inflammatory disease that resulted in like these two gigantic abscesses. I had to go to the gynecologist in Bogota in Colombia and go on serious antibiotics. And then I finally ended up back in the Colombian jungle with my teachers for a year and a half, where I had to like seriously clear all the sexual trauma from my body. And at this point, I was also with my second serious partner, my second serious relationship, which I can see now was a relationship built not only on a lot of wounding, but also a lot of disassociation and a lot of disembodiment from my female experience as a woman. I met my ex-partner when I was still in this phase of, I am not a woman. I don't want to claim the role of the woman in this relationship. I don't want to play that role. And there was a lot of confusion and distortion then when it came to our dynamic as well, right? And so what started finally shifting things for me was that I went through this 9-month long womb infection where I almost lost my fertility. I went to the doctor, got things sorted out with antibiotics, and then after that, I went to the jungle for a full year and a half, where I lived with my late teachers, Abuelo Kerewin and Abuela Maria. And it was during this process that I finally started to understand what it means to be a woman, and not what it means to be a woman in terms of violence, in terms of abuse, in terms of rape, in terms of lack of safety in my body, which had been what my experience of womanhood was up until this point. I was in a place where the relationships between men and women and the roles of men and women was like really clearly defined within an indigenous context, right? With the Kofan people. Very clear roles of this is what women do, this is what men do. In a space where, because there were clear roles, there wasn't like competition between men and women. Um, and I also was in a place where, for the first time ever, I felt safe with the men around me. I felt deeply, deeply protected by the men around me. And the vast majority of my teachers in the jungle were actually men. They were male shamans, all of whom I experienced as like, grandfather figures. Like my teacher, Abuelo Kerewin, really embodied like my spiritual grandfather. The other elders really embodied a sense of like my spiritual uncles, right? These men who were looking after me, who were protecting me, and who were honoring my experience as a woman without any, even the slightest hint of the threat of like sexual violence or even sexual distortion in any way. Like I just felt so safe with these men. And I felt for the first time that maybe, just maybe, it was safe to be a woman in this world, and that maybe I could try. And so through this process in the jungle, right, I'm going through this deep unraveling of a lot of my own abuse and a lot of internalized misogyny and a lot of competing with men and a lot of thinking that I had to prove my value, that I had to prove my value as a woman, rather than understanding that my value is innate. It's innate due to all of the gifts that womanhood brings to the world. And it was profound, right? Because as I was clearing all of this junk and all of this distortion, all this pain and all this wounding, when I tell you, like, my creativity was flourishing. I mean, the art that I created during this period of time, I never ever considered myself a visual artist. I was always like, no, I'm just like a performance artist, right? I was drawing, I was painting, I was beading, I was weaving, I was singing, I was dancing, I was writing all the time. Like, I literally couldn't stop creating. I literally couldn't stop. Okay. Um, and when I was in ceremony, I was receiving all of these really beautiful downloads of what is the purpose of the female body, right? Like, what is the point of having a womb? What is the point of having a vagina? What is the point of having breasts? What is the point of having hips and a waist and like a body that looks like this and functions like this? And the visions that I would get and the very clear teachings of like the internal female physiology was also all being complemented by all of these books that I was reading, right? I would go into the nearest town, which was like 2 hours away in the back of a truck, where there was an internet cafe, and I was downloading all of these different books that I could read on my Kindle when I was back in the jungle, all about women's health. And I had been in this inquiry now at this point for probably like 4 or 5 years of, food and how to support yourself with a nourishing diet, herbs and how to support yourself with plants, pelvic care, vaginal steams, vaginal health practices, all of this kind of stuff of just like how do you support the female physiology and the female reproductive system. And so in ceremony, I'm getting all of this like very intense cosmic psychedelic information. And then out of ceremony, in my studies of like listening to podcasts and reading books and getting like more of a Western scientific perspective of it, I'm weaving all of this in and I'm recognizing like, wow, like I really want to be a woman. I really want to be a woman. I want this. I want what I already have. I want my birthright. I want what has been gifted to me, right? And so it took time for me to get there. It took a lot of time. But what was really kind of unraveling things for me was that I got this blueprint of these initiations of womanhood that we all go through, that are like cross-cultural, that are aligned with our female physiology. And it was the blueprint of birth, blood, sex, death, and rebirth. And I was going through different phases in my plant medicine studies of focusing on those 5 specific initiations, which is something that I'm going to get into in future episodes. But birth, blood, sex, death, and rebirth, all of that are the female initiations that we go through. We don't have to prove ourselves to anyone because internally we move through these physiologic processes every single moment of every single day, right? On a monthly cycle, on a lifetime cycle of what it means to move into menarche, what it means to move into pregnancy and postpartum, what it means to move into menopause, all the different phases of womanhood, they are marked by these 5 physiologic initiations: birth, blood, sex, death, and rebirth. And so I'm going through this whole process. And I'm so happy because I finally found my elders. I found my teachers. I found the ones who are initiating me into this understanding of what it means to be a woman, what it means to be an adult woman, to be an intact woman. And I'm like, yes, I found it. Amazing. I have the orientation. I'm so blessed. I never have to worry about this ever again. And then, of course, my elders die because they were old. My elder abuelo Kerwin was 110. My elder abuela Maria was 86. And they died right at the moment that I was like, I just found these elders, right? I had been learning under them at this point for about 3 years. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, I just found you. And now I don't have elders anymore? Seriously? What am I supposed to do? And I know that this is a wound that so many people in our modern culture walk with of like, who am I supposed to look to for orientation and for guidance and understanding when I don't have any elders. I don't have any intact lineage. I don't have any culture to orient myself to. Like, what do we do? And for like 6 months after they died, I was really searching. Me and my ex-partner were really, really searching who's going to be our next elder? Who are we going to learn under? Who's going to be the person to give us orientation? Who are we going to apprentice with? What are we going to do, right? And we tried so hard to find people to learn under. We tried really, 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 really hard. And I think my ex-partner kind of figured out a couple months before I did that we were not in that phase of apprenticeship anymore. We were in the phase of self-initiation, which was what actually our elders who had passed on had told us happens at a certain point on a person's path, that they have to self-initiate. And neither of us wanted to believe it, but I think he wrapped his head around it faster than I did. It took me a long time to really accept that I was out of that phase of my learning and that I really had to move into some deep self-initiation work. And I didn't want to learn it, and basically the universe forced me to. The universe was like, we're going to remove every single crutch that you rely on to avoid this process of self-initiation. We're going to remove your elders, right? They died. Any new elders that you're trying to seek out are not going to be aligned. Your partnership is going to fall apart. And also, now you have no money. I had $250 in my bank account. I'm living in the jungle. I have no way to make money. And I had to come back to the United States after basically 4.5 years of being away from the States and mostly being in the jungle. I had to go back and I had to live with my parents in their basement on an air mattress and figure it out. And the funny part of all of this was that I got back to the States and I was so in my ego. I was like, I've been initiated, okay? Like, y'all don't even know. I've been living in the jungle for all these years and I've drank so much medicine and I've been with, these big deal shamans and political leaders and spiritual healers and I apprenticed them with them and blah, 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 blah. Like, my ego was through the roof. And I was really like, I've been initiated. And I can laugh at it now because it's like so, so funny. Because the reality was that I still, even after all of that apprenticeship, all of that orientation, all of that guidance, all of that education with my elders, I still had not reinitiated myself into womanhood. I was still in a phase of angry teenage girl, straight up. And what I had to face was really with my family, with my mom and my dad and my sisters, to recognize that I was still operating from this place of an angry, hurt teenage girl. I was not an initiated woman at this point, an initiated adult woman. I was 28 years old, but I was still acting like pretty much the 18-year-old who had left my parents' house. And a lot of this showed up with anger towards my mother. Deep, deep anger towards my mother around feeling like she had failed as the person who was supposed to initiate me into womanhood. And the amount of really unkind judgment that I threw at her for many, many months was, I mean, it's very embarrassing to have to admit now, but it was the truth. And a lot of anger towards my grandmother and my great grandmother and so many women, specifically on my mother line, like the amount of anger that I was moving through for months was just like almost unbearable. And it was so embarrassing. So embarrassing. Even when I was in it, I was like, how am I still acting like this? How is it possible that I am still acting like this? This is absurd. And what I was finally able to come around to was like making peace with my angry inner teenager and really listening to her. And what I found with this inquiry is that, an angry teenage girl is actually a young woman who is begging for initiation. And she's begging for a rite of passage where she gets to understand, how do I individuate from my family? What is my new community role? How do I serve? What is my purpose and how do I serve? And how do I transition from my girlhood into eventually my motherhood? What is this phase of young womanhood, young maidenhood meant to be? And so when I was able to like soften into that reality that an angry teenage girl is a young woman begging for initiation, I also had to recognize that I had to initiate myself into that because I didn't have anyone around me to initiate me. I didn't have anyone to say, this is your community role. This is your purpose. This is how you can serve. This is how you can individuate. I didn't have that at all. And no women really do right now. We don't have that. That's the very harsh reality of what modern womanhood looks like right now. And so I had to become my own elder and I had to really tap into my future self and say, how would she initiate me? If she was here right now, how would she initiate me? And then I have to do that, right? And I think the really painful wound around all of this as well was that it required so much unbelievable forgiveness on my part towards my mother and my father. Not necessarily for the ways in my childhood that they didn't show up, because I feel like I had done a lot of that. I'd done a lot of like inner child healing, and I'd done a lot of, accepting what happened in my childhood years with them. But what I hadn't accepted was a lot of the healing that I needed to do with my angry inner teenager and my angry inner, like, young 20s version of myself that felt quite abandoned by my parents. And I think that this is just a general theme with what happens in many family systems, which is that our parents, when we're young, have the energy, they have the capacity, they have the time, they have like the internal resourcing to really be available for young children. But at a certain point, when we reach our, you know, puberty years and our teenage years, one, our parents are exhausted, they're under-resourced, they are overworked, they're underpaid, they don't have a village, they are like doing the job that 20 people are supposed to do. And our parents are tapped out. And by the time that we're teenagers, where we're fairly self-sufficient, they don't have the energy and the resourcing to be able to really still attune to us. And they're also having to relive their teenage years through our teenage years. And they have a lot of really intense unresolved trauma with their own parents that never got addressed. And they didn't get initiated into their womanhood or their manhood. And so they actually don't know how to meet us. And they don't know how to be parents who are able to attune to our experience of gradual individuation without moving into passivity or moving into abuse, right? They don't have the capacity to say, you can individuate and have the freedom that you are meant to have at this age, but you can't do anything dangerous to yourself or another person. They don't have the capacity to do that without passivity or without abuse. And then they also don't have the capacity to attune to our emotional expression that is occurring when we're moving through really intense hormonal adjustments for both men and women. They don't have the capacity to say, you are allowed to feel and experience everything that you're feeling and experience, and I'm here for it, and I can hold you in it, but you're not allowed to be an asshole to me or to anybody else while you're going through that emotional expression. You have to learn how to go through that emotional expression in a way that is mature. And I'm going to teach you by doing it myself with you, right? Like, We don't have parents who are capable of that currently, right now. Very few. I think that like millennials are kind of the first generation that are really being tested with this. And I'm like not technically a millennial, I'm technically Gen Z, but I'm right on the cusp. And so a lot of this process was having to reckon with the fact that like my parents have some serious unhealed abandonment wounds from their teenage years that were then repeated in my teenage years that I was still living out as an adult woman, as literally a 28 and 29-year-old woman, okay? Like my inner teenager was just fighting with their inner teenager, which was fighting with my grandparents' inner teenager, like all within the context of my own spirit. Like we're all just mad and we're angry. And the reason we're angry is because we didn't receive initiation. And so this was my whole process of recognizing if something's going to change here in terms of what adulthood is going to look like for me versus what it looked like for my parents or for my grandparents. What it looks like is very serious self-initiation and re-initiation into adult womanhood that I did not get from any woman and that I'm not going to get from any woman outside of me. And so, what is that going to look like? And so, essentially, during this process, what this looked like for me was reaching out to women in my life, reaching out to my friends who are in the same process, finding teachers, finding mentors, finding people who I could say, that woman has a really strong spine, and that's how I want to walk in the world. And so I need to do what she does and do what she has done to get there, essentially. But before I got to that process of recognizing like what is going to be the way forward, I actually did have to move through this very intense acknowledgement of what had been lost in my lineage and essentially going through these 5 stages of grief, right? Which is denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally just acceptance. Like this is the reality of what womanhood looks like right now. And what I was feeling into a lot, and what's fascinating to learn about in German New Medicine, is how separation works in the body, how it works in the psyche, and how it works in a spirit, in a lineage. And when we're talking about separation, right, I can speak from my own lineage, which is going to be predominantly of European women, right? When we look at all of the separation and the lineage fracture and the being pulled away from the land, being pulled away from our traditional women's wisdom keeping ways, being pulled away from our midwifery practices, being pulled away from the initiations of womanhood and the rites of passage of womanhood, when we go through any kind of separation, it's impacting us in the cerebral cortex and it's impacting us in the temporal lobe as well, which is all recording memory. And what happens when we go through separation conflicts, where we're being separated from people and from cultures and from land and from traditional wisdom keeping ways, it's fucking painful. It's so painful to lose your connection to that. And the way that nature is merciful is that it creates literal memory loss in your brain, in your temporal lobe, in order to make living bearable. The pain of the separation is numbed, it's dulled, it's literally forgotten in your memory. It's like hidden away so that you can just move forward and survive. And then you can pass on your genes to the next generation because nature wants to flourish. Life wants more life to occur. And so when I look at like the separation conflicts that have occurred within our own lineages and these fracturings and these loss of wisdom ways, and I see the memory loss that comes with that, this trauma responsive memory loss, I see this intense phase of feminine amnesia that we're all through. And I can say that I went through this intense process when I first got back to the States of a lot of like feminine amnesia. It felt like everything that I had learned in the jungle about how to orient to my body, about how to take care of myself, about how to support my cycle, about how to work with my blood, about how to rest, about how to really be at peace. it felt like I forgot literally all of it for like 6 months or something. And I was reverting back to the way that I had always lived before I had gone through my initiations in the jungle. And it was this insane thing where essentially I was just in a class where we were talking about the importance of giving our blood back to the earth. And I was like, why have I not done that for 5 months? I did that every single month when I lived in the jungle, every single month for over a year and a half. And it was something that I loved doing, and it really transformed my life. How could I have stopped giving my blood back to the earth just because I'm back in the United States? This is crazy. And I went through this process again of starting to give my blood back to the earth, and boom, everything started to fall into place. And it felt like I finally came back into my soul. And these separation conflicts of this memory loss, like I moved past it finally. And it was a really important couple months to go through because I was like, oh my God, yeah, this is what modern women are in. They're not taking care of themselves because they don't want to. They're not just not doing it because they're not capable of it. They're doing it because we are under this spell of feminine amnesia through all of these different generations of separation. And so it's like an intelligent thing that our body is doing that's saying, like, forget to be a woman, forget all of your medicine, forget all of the internal physiologic initiations that you've been through, forget all of that because it's not safe. Forget all of that because it exposes you to being burned at the stake, to being hung, to being tortured, to being drowned. Forget all of that and just be a man. It's safe. It's safer. It's safer if you forget your womanhood. You're going to be safe in this way. And so then I was like, oh, fuck. Okay, this wound again. This wound again. How do I come back to what I know my true power is? And it brought me back again to these cross-cultural physiologic initiations of womanhood: birth, blood, sex, death, and rebirth, just over and over and over again, knowing that that is the orientation, that's the blueprint, that's the map, that is the biological cosmology of the female experience. And so just tapping into that over and over and over again brought me all of the like feminine resourcing, both internally and externally, of the women who were coming into my sphere, right? The friendships that I was creating, the teachers that I was calling in, the trainings that I was doing, all of it. And it started to really finally reflect also in my financial situation. I was able to make really good money, to hold on to that money, to save that money, to invest that money in my education, to invest that money in my future. It drastically transformed my creativity, my ability to do this podcast, my ability to write in the way that I do on my Substack, my ability to, continue moving through dance and through song, through beading, through drawing, painting, all of this, while also holding down a full-time job at this crazy restaurant where I worked, where I'm working 40 hours a week, and where I really did feel resourced. And so much of that was because I came also into balance with this understanding of, birth, blood, sex, death, and rebirth. All of that also really needs a solid masculine container to hold it. When we're talking about the feminine initiations, they also need solid masculine framework. And so then came the process of recognizing my own relationship to the masculine and to men, but through my own experience of how my masculine was showing up for me. And the funny, um, I guess, metaphor that we can use for this, that some of my teachers, Kid and Maura Flynn from the Holy Well, talk about a lot, is that your inner masculine is not supposed to sound like a cop in your head. It's not supposed to sound like a fucked up, abusive asshole that's like, get this shit done. What are you doing? You're such a failure. You're a little bitch. Like, that's not what the masculine is, what a healthy masculine is supposed to sound like. The healthy masculine in your mind is meant to sound like what is possible, what would feel good to have done, right? Like, what is going to be the long-term benefit of this short-term discomfort that you're in right now? Really being able to say, like, you know what is best for you, and you know that you can do it. And so just do it. And just with like so much love, right? And so cultivating this stronger and stronger inner masculine also brought me into a deeper space of being able to express my feminine in a way that I hadn't been able to before because I hadn't felt safe, not just with men outside of me, but I hadn't felt safe with the masculine inside of me. And then I got to this orientation where I was like, oh my God, my inner masculine is amazing. My inner masculine loves me and protects me in a way that I didn't know was possible, in a way that makes me understand I have my own back. God has my back. The universe has my back. My path has my back, right? And this was when I was like, whoa, okay, like this is what the reinitiation into womanhood really, really looks like. It's orienting to those feminine initiations, the internal physiologic initiations. And then it looks like creating that very beautiful, like, what is the word? Impeccable inner masculine that shows up for us in a way that can hold all of it. And this is how we do our work as women, right? This is how we serve. This is how we know what our community role is. This is how we go from being that like angry teenage girl into this really, really impeccable adult woman, mature, healthy, resourced, online, serving, pouring her gifts into the world. This is how we do it. Okay, cool. I was like, okay, I'm kind of getting it now. I'm kind of getting it now. And so all of that is to say that has been what my whole ethos really has been for like a decade of my life. It's been really, really clear in the past year and a half, I would say. And then in this break of the podcast, it's been what has been wanting to pour forth. So over the next month, this is the theme that we're going to be following of what does it mean to reinitiate ourselves into womanhood? What are the tools that we have at our disposal? How do we do this? Literally, how do we do this as modern women? What is the way forward, right? So there's going to be many future episodes about this. I'm going to be writing about this a lot on my Substack with my email newsletter. There's going to be classes that I'm going to be teaching because this is something that I feel right now is it's undeniable in my life. Personally, it's undeniable in what I'm seeing with women. And it's also undeniable when I think about the fact, we're wrapping up this year of the wood snake, which was all about shedding essentially everything that we've gone through over the past 9 years. We were in a wood snake year and we were in a 9 year in numerology. And we're moving into this fire horse year on February 17th. And so I'm like, okay, like the women are ready. I'm ready, right? The women around me, we are ready. We have done so much shedding and we're ready to like fire walk. We are ready to fire run. We are ready for this, okay? So I'm really looking forward to like this next month of deepening into this theme. I highly recommend that if you want to be connecting with more of this, you can subscribe to my Substack newsletter. That will be in the link in bio. And yeah, let's see what continues coming through over the next month, over the closing of this Chinese New Year, moving into the next one, and we'll see what happens. Thank you guys so much for listening. Ciao, ciao.